Today, I'm bringing you three underrated dividend stocks that just fly under the radar. I happen to own all three in my portfolio, and I'm going to share with you why I personally love them. The first underrated stock on this list is HP Inc., ticker symbol HPQ. Price wise, HPQ hasn't really gone a whole lot of anywhere recently, but that it actually plays into why I like the stock. It trades at a very undemanding price to earnings of about 12 with a dividend yield that is definitely market beating at 3.9%. Their revenue over the last few years has been pretty much the same story. It was flat, then experienced a rally followed by a dip. This is because part of their business depends on PC sales, which are somewhat cyclical, and their larger, but higher margin printing business is somewhat stagnant. While the market's been pricing them low due to limited growth and issues with the cyclical nature of the revenue in the business, they've been using this opportunity to buy back shares at a ferocious pace at low valuations. This means just for holding on to shares in the company, your stake continues to rise every single year. Another reason this continues to fly under the radar, in my opinion, is that the analyst price estimates are really nothing to write home about, with a high of $39, a low of 23, and the stock price sitting pretty close to that midpoint with a consensus of hold. This really screams from the analysts, nothing to see here, folks. If that all wasn't enough, why don't we talk about the thing you all really came here to learn about, and that's the dividend. 3.86% current yield, a modest and sustainable payout ratio of only 45%, with dividend growth from the last year being 5%. Now, 5% isn't much of an increase, but as you can see, they've been steadily increasing this dividend over time for the last several years. And I think with this payout ratio and with the rate of buybacks, it's likely that they'll continue to do so into the future. The second under the radar dividend stock I'll be discussing today is Smith & Wesson Brands, ticker symbol SWBI. This gun manufacturer has been around since the 1800s, but they tend to fly under the radar because of their relatively low market cap. As you can see, there's no analyst consensus when it comes to Smith & Wesson Brands. It doesn't really get the same attention as a lot of other companies because of the fact it has a relatively low market cap. It just doesn't get the same amount of coverage. While I've done quite well year to date on Smith & Wesson Brands, as evidenced by the year-to-date chart, it's important to remember that this is a cyclical business, and just because I've done well so far this year doesn't necessarily mean I'll do very well next year or the year after that. It's really all about the long term for me. And you have to be understanding that there's going to be some volatility in this stock price because of the cyclical nature of their revenue. That being said, there are a few reasons why I really Smith
like
& Wesson's them for model the long is haul. Quite simple, but it speaks loudly in spite of being pretty straightforward. So they have their different targets and goals for EBITDA and gross margin, which is fine and dandy if they can stick to those. But the things that speak loudest to me as a shareholder are wanting to stay flush with cash, wanting to avoid debt, wanting to continue to grow their dividend, which they just started paying recently, and, of course, reducing share count. With Smith & Wesson, you're most likely not going to achieve your results with growth. Let's face it, this isn't the next Apple. And frankly, they don't pretend like they're going to be the next Apple. They pretty much rely on a very sound, solid strategy to return value to shareholders in the long run while understanding that their business is cyclical. They try to steer clear of a lot of debt and keep a good amount of cash in the coffers. If you can get in at a reasonable price and get a good value on share buybacks and dividends over time, I think it's possible to do quite well with this company, but it certainly isn't going to be anything too crazy. In my opinion, we may have actually saved the best for last on this one. Our third and final under the radar dividend stock that I personally don't think gets enough attention in the market is Comcast. CMCA is the ticker. This is an amalgamation of Comcast, NBC, and Universal. As we head into our final stock that flies under the radar, I just wanted to remind everybody to give us a like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed the video. I first got into Comcast on a price dip late last year, and I have to say, for the most part, I've been smiling ever since. The position is up nearly 25% year to date in 2023, and personally on this one, I think I've hit an absolute home run. Now, just because my timing was good doesn't necessarily make me right, but this company I really like the consistency with which Comcast continues to grow their top line revenue over the years. Granted, there was a pullback during COVID, and not every single year has been a grand slam. It's hard to get excited over 4 or 5%, but a lot of these jumps are high single digit to low double digit, and that's pretty darn good for a company as old and as large as Comcast. In addition to that, they've managed to slowly but steadily drive down share count through repurchases, which is always a nice thing to see. In addition, they pay out a pretty solid dividend, and while it hasn't been a straight line up, the dividend has, in fact, more than doubled since 2015. And I would say that's a pretty respectable rate of dividend growth. When it comes to the dividend, I think it's important to point out that the yield solidly beats the market at 2.61%. And with the growth we mentioned before, that is very likely to continue. Now, the payout ratio looks slightly concerning when you compare it to earnings, but that only takes into consideration the last year's earnings in 2022. And earnings varies a lot compared to free cash flow. So the 5-year average free cash flow for Comcast is $13.71 billion per year, with dividends paid of $4.75 billion. So that comes out to below 35% of their average free cash flow paid out in dividends. I would say that's fairly well covered. Also, while Comcast's cable and broadband internet business provides a steady backbone, almost a utility like consistency in revenue and cash flow, they also are so much more than a cable company. For example, they own Universal, which includes Universal Studios and the theme parks that go along with it, as well as the movies. They also own the NBC network, as well as the streaming service Peacock. And finally, they also co own Hulu with Disney. They have a 33% stake, which is valued at roughly $9 billion should Disney exercise their option to buy them out, and if both parties were to agree. I'd like to invite you to comment below if you own any of these three stocks, or if you've added any of them to your watch list. Make sure you also join the Discord, link in the description, and catch me live every Saturday at 8 p.m. on Cash Flow Kings. Link in the description to that as well. Take it easy, everyone.